I'm Josh Christensen.
I'm Kristin Toussaint.
And this is Most Innovative Companies. On today's episode, we talk to Fast Company Global Technology Editor Harry McCracken.
Apple, at its best, has always been about making the hardware and software seamless.
B-Lab's co-lead executive, Sarah Schwimmer.
300,000 companies around the world now have used this tool.
And as always, keeping tabs.
Zach Galifianakis has a gardening show.
But first, here's the download, the news you need to know this week in the world of business and innovation.
The war in Iran continues to impact the global economy. Here in the U.S., average gas prices are up to $4.50 a gallon. The Trump administration's Project Freedom planned to guide commercial ships safely through the Strait of Hormuz, but Trump quickly reversed course and paused that plan this past Tuesday. The White House also once again said it was close to a deal with Iran to end the war, unnamed sources told Axios. Officials have said they were close to a deal multiple times during the conflict, but have yet to reach one.
This is just Groundhog's Day over and over again.
Yeah.
And it's going to end up just being like a similar deal to the JCPOA when that goes through, like the Obama-Iran deal, which is, well, this isn't the podcast for that. Go listen to like Pod Save the World or something. I'm mostly concerned about these gas prices because I have a car in the city.
It's more in New York,
It's more in New York. Near me, it was like $4.70 to fill up my tank of gas. It's awful.
I just spoke to someone for a story who's in Seattle, and it's like $6.50 there.
Oh, God. And it's just like, I know that gas prices aren't the economy, and I want to not be one of those people that's just like, well, gas prices are high, so the economy's bad. Like, I know that's not how it works, but just from a optics perspective, every street corner has a sign where you can see it go from $3 to $3.50 to now $4.50. Some places $6.50 in Seattle. Like, that's just the worst possible political PR you can possibly have for inflation. You literally are advertising inflation everywhere. It's crazy. It's insane. Anyways, next story. We've got another round of layoffs attributed to AI. Coinbase is letting go of 14% of its staff, or roughly 700 employees. In an email to the company, Coinbase CEO Brian Armstrong said that there are two main reasons for the layoffs. One, the real reason, I shouldn't say, I'm editorializing. I shouldn't do that. One, market volatility in the crypto industry. And second, AI. Armstrong claims that the pace of what's possible with a small, focused team has changed dramatically. Quote, "We are adjusting early and deliberately to rebuild Coinbase to be lean, fast, and AI native." So this is the cause du jour of companies to claim that laying off hundreds, if not thousands of people is because we can do so much more with AI. And listen, I think there are some very real instances where like headcount increases are impacted impacted because team productivity can go up with the use of AI, particularly when it comes to like coding teams and stuff like that. It's not 700 people worth.
Definitely not. And also, the AI isn't free either.
No.
There was a story recently about how it can cost more than a human worker to use all these AI credits.
This is there. It's just like with all the coverage, it's just like I see the gains in the technology. It is not at the place where it is mass replacing people.
700 people.
And even if it was getting to that point, it's impossible to take these CEOs at their word because we know that there is just some mitigation of fallout from the street. And like Coinbase did see like their stock go down a little bit after this, but like whenever you hear like every time there's layoffs, there's some sort of like word to advisors about like fiscal responsibility. But it's impossible to be like, okay, are they really replacing people with AI? Or did they, like many other tech companies, overhire during the pandemic? And then they're in the crypto industry, which is not doing too great right now, as he said, and they needed to lay off some workers for the sake of shareholder value. It's that.
Yeah.
It's that.
That short-term versus long-term outlook, really hard to balance. On Wednesday, philanthropist and founder of CNN Ted Turner died. He was 87. Turner started his career in media when he was 24 years old and took over his father's billboard company. He then moved into journalism, bought radio stations, and revolutionized news in 1980 when he founded CNN, which is the world's first 24-hour TV news network.
I guess thank you, Ted Turner.
I can't imagine a time without 24-hour news. It's so dominating now.
Us millennials have been just so pickled by... We've never known a world other than the 24-hour news cycle.
Yep.
Last Saturday, budget airline Spirit suddenly announced it was shutting down and doing so immediately. So if you had booked a Spirit airline flight for the future... you're going to have to find another flight. Seriously, like thousands and thousands of people just shit out of luck with their flights. It's crazy. The sudden nature of the closure was a shock, but it's not entirely surprising that the airline came to an end. Spirit has been struggling financially for a long time now. One lifeline was a possible merger with JetBlue in 2024, but a federal judge blocked it. I think there's also just some... JetBlue's not exactly doing great, and it wasn't exactly sure that, like, that merger wouldn't just crash two companies.
Yeah.
It certainly would have affected the low fares that Spirit introduced. They also were possibly going to merge with Frontier at some point, if you remember that.
There was
other
a lot
budget
of discussion,
airline.
yeah.
None of that happened. Following the judge blocking that merger, Spirit filed for bankruptcy. The recent spike in jet fuel costs likely, and this is just calling back to our first news story, likely was the final nail in the coffin for Spirit.
I used to fly Spirit all the time.
I never flew Spirit. I would fly Southwest was like the kind of the budget airline that made the most sense for me. They were a punchline for a long time, Spirit Airlines, but when you have a low price option in the market, they were there for people and it drove down prices overall. I think a lot of experts are saying that this is just, even if you didn't fly Spirit Airline,
you're going to feel the effects.
You're going to feel the effects.
Yeah. GameStop is making another strange bet. The company is planning...
I love this story so much. Sorry, go on.
The company is planning to buy eBay for $56 billion to turn it into...
Heavy scare quotes on planning.
Quotes planning. To turn it into an Amazon competitor. GameStop is offering $125 per share, half in cash and half in stock. But how will GameStop, which is valued at around $11 billion, afford eBay, which is worth $46 billion? GameStop CEO Ryan Cohen told the Wall Street Journal that he has a $20 billion financing letter from TD Bank and $9 billion in cash. Andrew Ross Sorkin tried to ask Cohen about the rest of the money on his show Squawk Box, but Cohen didn't give a straight answer. He just kept repeating that the deal is half cash, half stock, and all the information is on their website. The math doesn't quite add up.
No, the math's not mathing, as the kids would say. And poor Andrew Ross Sorkin, friend of the pod, has been on this show before, and his co-hosts were just at a loss. It was one of the most bizarre press hits I've seen by a CEO in a long time. Yeah, it was wild. It was wild. And the memes have rolled out since then.
GameStop's used to memes.
And that's the news you need to know today. So, Kristin, first, do you think you could ever be a CEO of a company? And two, if you could take over as CEO for a company, which one would it be?
No, honestly, is the answer.
Same. Absolutely
They're
not
a different breed to me. They're just it's a whole different breed. Yeah.
But if you could theoretically take over a company.
That's so hard because I really, when I see turnover news, I always appreciate when a company promotes someone from within, right? Instead of sort of bringing in this outsider. I just think that's a nice trajectory to see. It's like a harken back to this really dream of like working your way up the corporate ladder. So that's...
Yeah, I mean, we've seen two of those recently. Bob Iger's replacement, Josh D'Amaro, and now who we're going to talk about today, John Ternus taking over for Tim Cook. I feel like of the two jobs, the Disney CEO seems more fun. Like, if I could be the CEO of Disney, I would never. I'd be terrible at
Then
it.
would you have to be in Florida?
Oh.
Or
Oof.
California, I guess.
If it's California, I can do it. If it's Florida.
Sorry to
No.
any listeners from Florida.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually like the real answer is like, I'd want to be CEO of a company that doesn't really need a CEO. It's too small, but just running weird. I don't know. I'll take over for Sam Reich at Dropout. How about that? Sam, give me your job.
That
sounds like a
CEO
fun job. That's
yeah.
a great CEO job. I'm sure he works very hard, but that seems fun. He can still host all the things.
Exactly.
I just want to be the CEO of an entertainment company. Or maybe like a studio head. I don't know, something like that.
Yeah.
Like maybe Netflix, maybe like Ted Sarandos' job. You get to go to all the movie premieres. You get a small cameo in the studio.
That's why you do it.
Well, anyways, we're talking about this because we are going to be joined by Harry McCracken today, our global tech editor, to talk about what's next for Apple now that they have identified and set a timeline for their new CEO, John Ternus, to take over. If you have missed the news, Tim Cook is stepping down after 15 years as CEO of the company. Tim Cook was the handpicked successor of Steve Jobs, of course. Apple's senior vice president of hardware engineering, John Ternus, is taking over and will lead the company beginning in September. Of course, Apple is one of the most successful tech companies in the world, but John Ternus is inheriting it with some big challenges too, like coming up with the next blockbuster product that Apple hasn't done for a while. I think the erasure of the Apple Vision Pro here is a little much. But probably more challenging than that is figuring out Apple's place in the AI era. They just really haven't been able to make their AI lab work. We've heard the headlines, and now we have a deeper dive into how Ternus got here, what's next for him and Apple, and what kind of legacy Tim Cook will be remembered for. So here's Kristin and I's conversation with Harry McCracken. Hey, Harry, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Josh, it's great to be here.
So while I was literally just saying this before we started recording, but this seems to be the last 6 weeks is even more Apple heavy for you and your coverage area than I imagine than it usually is.
Even for Apple, which is probably the newsiest tech company of the last 20 years, this has been a big period.
So for anyone who missed the news, and as we said in the intro, Tim Cook is leaving as CEO after 15 years, I believe it was, and he's being replaced by John Ternus. So before we get into the details and what this means for Apple going forward, I just want to get your, as someone who's covered this company for a long time and is probably as entrenched in Silicon Valley comings and goings as anyone else in the industry, what was your initial reaction to this news?
Well, it was not a surprise. It's been rumored for quite a while, and my guess is that Apple tried to get it out there so that it did not come as a surprise, either that Cook was not leaving, but becoming executive chairman, and that John Ternus was the person who was replacing him. So by the time it finally happened, it was maybe almost less of a wow than it should be, given that it is one of the bigger executive changes in Silicon Valley in a long time. And Cook did turn out to be a very long-serving chief executive of Apple.
Before we get to John Ternus himself, there were a few other candidates that people were possibly expecting, although it seems like John Ternus became the kind of pole position over the past number of times. Could you talk a little bit about the succession plan and maybe some of the other people who were in the running, so to speak?
Sure. Well, Apple is not the kind of company who would have surprised everybody by hiring an outsider. It was clear it was going to be one of a relatively short list of people who had a ton of experience at the company. One of them was the chief operating officer, Jeff Williams, but then he retired last year, so he got knocked out of it. And then there are these other folks like Craig Federighi and Eddie Q and Greg Josiak, all of who have been there forever. They're also all not that much younger than Tim Cook. John Ternus was at age 51, was sort of the one among these contenders who was significantly younger, and he's done a great job being in charge of hardware. And so pretty quickly, the world settled as him as the most logical person. And my guess was also that was true within Apple. He was kind of the most obvious person, and everybody else less so.
Yeah, a lot of has been made of Apple returning to a quote unquote product guy as the CEO. So let's talk a little bit about this. Who is John Ternus and how did he get here?
Well, he's been at Apple for 25 years. He started in 2001 working on displays, and little by little took on more and more responsibility until he was running hardware. He's 51. He's at an age where he's old enough to have been there a long time, but also young enough to have the potential to be CEO for just as long as Tim Cook was. He is not super flashy. He's kind of low-key, thoughtful, not regarded as somebody who takes enormous number of risks. But yes, he is somebody who's done an extremely competent job at the things he's been charged with. And he is a product person. Tim Cook was the ultimate operations manager, but he was not deeply involved in creating the products. And John Ternus is somebody who you can see getting their hands a lot more dirty and having a lot more opinions about what new Apple products should be like, rather than entirely resting on the skills of the people who report to him.
What were some of his big, recent, product wins? I believe he worked on the Apple Neo rollout that just happened.
Yeah, well, in general, Macs have been a big win. This is this product line that's more than 40 years old, and it's probably in the best shape it's ever been in. A few years ago, Apple switched from Intel chips to its own processors, and that's done fantastically well in terms of Macs having really remarkable battery life and great performance. And, the big knock against Macs for the longest time is that most people couldn't afford them. Very few people actually spend $1,000 or more for a laptop. And it's been rumored for a while that there would be a cheaper Mac. I think most people were not expecting it to be as cheap as it is. It starts at $599 and $499 for schools. And it's not a cheap chintzy Mac. It's a really nice one, and it's kind of upended the whole category of laptops at that price point, because there are lots of options in the Windows world, but most of them have not been all that great, and I think they're going to have to up their game to compete with the Neo, which is really a nice machine for the price tag.
It's so interesting to hear about someone who comes up in the company. I know you said that was expected for Apple, but it's just always great to hear that. What's the feeling about Ternus from inside the company, from the other employees and his peers?
Everything we know is positive. He does have a reputation as being extremely good at what he does and not super political and thoughtful. He does sound like the kind of person you'd want to see run the company. And yes, it is nice to see somebody who kind of created their career within Apple rise through the ranks and get to the top. Not surprising, again, at Apple. That's the kind of thing that they would tend to do.
I know you said he's a product guy also, but is there something that, especially inside Apple, that employees are excited to see from him? Has he given an indication of what might come next?
Well, I think he'll be extremely careful not to steal the show just yet, given that he does not become CEO until September 1st, which is right before Apple will probably announce new iPhones, and he will get the chance to enter the spotlight. I think in general, the big question for him is kind of the same one that people talked a lot about when Tim Cook was new, which is Apple going to do any truly new categories rather than just continue to crank out great iPhones and iPads and Macs? They do have a number of things in the works. There's a folding iPhone that we will probably see soon. Apparently there's a desktop robot screen. There are smart glasses, kind of in the same general zip code as the ones Meta came out with. So he certainly will have the opportunity to enter new categories, none of which sound like they're the next iPhone probably, but at least they're not just more of the same.
Quick aside, just on glasses, I don't want any more smart glasses, mostly because I'm just salty about the fact that if I were to get a pair of smart glasses, I would have to pay more to get my prescription in them as well.
I've never thought about that aspect, but yeah, true.
It just drives me crazy.
Same for me. As a glasses-wearing person, I have never gone as far as to get them just because of the hassle of getting prescription ones, even though that is entirely doable.
It is doable, but I just on principle alone, I won't do it. So, take that, Meta Ray-Ban. What is some of the main challenges for Ternus in his upcoming tenure?
Well, the obvious one is AI. If you're looking at the things that Apple did not get done while Tim Cook was CEO, it was to become at least perceived as an AI leader. You can certainly come up with a pretty long list of useful things in Apple products based on AI. But year before last, at their WWDC keynote, the big news was this amazing new version of Siri. And they still haven't shipped it.
No.
They last year, they said they were bumping it into the new year, which turned out to be 2026. And just recently, they announced they're doing a deal with Google to get access to Gemini, which is a great LLM, but it's a little surprising that so long after announcing this new version of Siri, they were still figuring out what AI would be based on. And even though John Ternus did come up through hardware, Apple at its best has always been about making the hardware and software seamless. So I'm actually guardedly optimistic that he will be helpful to the AI cause, just because he must have been thinking about AI for a long time. And again, he'll have the opportunity to kind of be more actively involved in shaping the products than Tim Cook would have. Just in general, I think software is an area where there's an opportunity to do better. Last year, Apple lost its longtime head of software design, Alan Dye. And a lot of people kind of came out at that point and said that Apple had not been doing that great a job with software for some time from the standpoint of design. And they have a new person in charge, Stephen LeMay, who I think has a chance at upping the game and taking things like the liquid glass interface and evolving it and refining it. And Ternus, again, can play a role in that as a product person.
Yeah, I think the Siri debacle, frankly, is probably one of the biggest surprising failures for Apple in quite a long time. And the fact that they just haven't been able to figure out how to make that work. And it's been pushback and pushback. And then the sort of Gemini news struck a lot of people as waving the white flag on their own internal AI systems. Seems like something they need to figure out. Or I don't know, do they need to figure that out? Or can they just keep making great hardware and be successful? I know that may be contradictory to what you just said, but I know a lot of people have been talking about they just need to make great hardware.
Well, a lot of people have pointed out that Apple has not been burning hundreds of billions of dollars on data centers and creating things which are amazing, but which it actually can't deploy without losing its shirt. Gemini might have been kind of the thing they did because they had to, but it is a great LLM, and there's so much opportunity to build interesting products on top of it by figuring out AI interfaces in a way nobody has done. So Apple at least has a shot at looking smart in the long run. And Apple, under Tim Cook, certainly was good at kind of being itself and not following every trend. I would expect Ternus to try to do that as well.
That's such an interesting point about where they're positioned in this sort of AI race. And so how does that set up Apple for how it's doing as a business, since it's not sort of in the top of that race that is dominating the market at the moment?
Well, Apple has been doing remarkably well. I mean, I think Tim Cook's legacy is that it became tremendously more successful under him than it ever was under Steve Jobs. It became the first company to hit a market cap of $1 trillion. It's at $4 trillion now. They just announced great numbers. The new iPhones are doing spectacularly well. Along with everything else, Ternus has to keep that going. Certainly nobody would consider him a success if the products got more interesting, but the numbers weren't as good. So he has to do both.
I mean, one major hurdle that we've seen a number of companies face right now is obviously the administration that's currently in the White House. Tim Cook has been remarkably deft at navigating this administration. I think it's something that, people have talked about CEOs debasing themselves a little bit. I mean, going to the Melania premiere, it's not because Tim Cook wants to, but it's to get Apple's business priorities accomplished or at least mitigate any issues that they may face from this administration. Is there any worry that this muddies that?
Probably not short term, because they've been quite explicit that Tim Cook is still going to be in charge as executive chairman of government relations. So Ternus is not going to have to jump into the frying pan of dealing with Trump immediately. And it could be years, I think, because Steve Jobs stepped down as CEO and then died a few weeks later. People are kind of stuck on the idea that Ternus is going to have to take charge immediately, when in fact Tim Cook is going to be deeply involved, and it's entirely conceivable that he'll be around for years to come.
So with Tim Cook's continued involvement, does that sort of like cast a shadow over John Ternus a little bit? Like, how much is he sort of going to be rising up to become a figurehead like Tim Cook did? It'll
be interesting to see. You can certainly imagine scenarios where Tim Cook is more involved than John Ternus would want as CEO. I think short term, it's probably great news, just because Tim Cook has proven there are so many things he can do well. And also Tim Cook's proven strengths seem to complement John Ternus's really well, along with knowing everything about being CEO from having done it for so many years. I mean, Cook is great at the operations stuff, the unglamorous stuff. I think he will probably be, perfectly willing to take one for the team in terms of being the one who continues to deal with the Trump administration. So I think for now, this is way better than if Cook had suddenly been out of the picture and John Ternus had to figure out everything on his own instantly.
Yeah, you lose that sort of institutional knowledge, and it's a harder starting point, I'm sure.
Yeah, and then there are all these other folks who have been there for decades, who Ternus will continue to work with. And at some point, these people will leave. It's entirely possible some of them will leave while John Ternus is CEO. And at that point, Apple needs to have fresh blood. Although in their case, fresh blood will probably be blood that's worked there for a decade or more, but at least not the same folks who have been in charge, especially given that most of the current people running the company actually worked with Steve Jobs. They've been around that long.
Fresh blood at Apple seems kind of like when we talk about fresh blood in the United States Senate. It's like, we just need someone young and virile.
Someone
like
in their 60s.
Yeah, exactly. Like a 58-year-old who's been in state government for the better part of their career. But that's part of the stability of Apple, which has been remarkable.
They've been super stable. I mean, they've never had to pivot. They never wake up and declare that the metaverse is the new thing, and then wake up again a year or two later and say, never mind, AI is the new thing. That's certainly one of Tim Cook's greatest legacies.
I think they should do the opposite of Allbirds and pivot to shoes, just kind of like Daniel Day-Lewis did that point in his career. Do you remember that?
I think
just went to Italy and became a cobbler.
For sure.
I would buy Apple shoes.
When Tim Cook became CEO, The Onion did a story, which has always stuck in my mind, where they had Tim Cook declaring that Apple was going to pivot to printers, and that was going to be the big new thing.
Okay, but if anyone could make a printer that works, would it be Apple?
An Apple printer
someone's going to figure it out.
An Apple printer actually might be great, but it's probably not going to be the next iPhone.
Mm-hmm. If Xerox couldn't figure it out, I don't know who can. At some point, I need an oral history of. Have we done an oral history of Xerox and Xerox PARC, Harry?
No, we should.
No, we should. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, we should start with photocopiers and then explain how this copier company created all the stuff that decades later the entire tech industry is still feasting on, and why Xerox did not make all that much money off all these things that were invented in its lab.
We've talked a little bit about Tim Cook's legacy in terms of success at Apple, but I think just to put a finer point on it, how is Tim Cook going to be remembered for his 15 years as CEO of Apple?
Well, I mean, when all is said and done, I think the enormous financial success of the company will be in there. When he became CEO, a lot of people weren't even sure that there could really be an Apple without Steve Jobs. He proved there could be one. And while they have not come up with a new product on the scale of the iPhone, nobody else has either. And things like the AirPods and Apple Watch are these enormous businesses, which any other company would be thrilled to have. I think you do have to factor Donald Trump in there. It's kind of hard to know right now how history will judge that. He certainly was pretty skillful about dealing with the administration, but that image of him giving the trophy to Donald Trump is really fresh in our minds right now and not great. Ultimately, whether that's mentioned way up in people's assessments of him or is down a bit, I'd say is hard to know right now.
I will always remember his legacy as Tim Apple.
I was going to say the same. Like, what's Ternus's new nickname to that?
Also, I think that some of it rests on John Ternus. Tim Cook is the person who decided that John Ternus should succeed him. One of the best decisions Steve Jobs made was to hand things over to Tim Cook. And if Ternus is great, I think that will redound to Tim Cook's benefit long term. And if Ternus turns out to be disappointing, people will also associate that with Tim Cook, because there are not many decisions a CEO makes that are bigger than choosing a person to succeed them. And so many extremely good CEOs have had trouble with this, such as Bob Iger at Disney, for example.
That intertwined legacy.
Yes.
Well, that's a great place to leave it. We'll be back with Harry for Keeping Tabs, but first, a quick break followed by Kristin's interview with B-Lab's Sarah Schwimmer. At Fast Company, when we talk about the success of a business, we often measure more than just market cap and ARR. You can tell as much by looking at each year's most innovative companies list. One facet we often take into account is social and environmental impacts. But how do you quantify those types of impacts? That's where B-Lab comes in. They are a global nonprofit network helping these companies assess how they benefit not just shareholders, but other stakeholders as well, like workers, communities, or the environment. B-Lab gives companies B Corp certifications. You've probably heard about a B Corp certification before, but maybe you didn't know as much about what went into that. This verifies that companies meet high standards of social and environmental performance, accountability, and transparency. They also have digital assessment tools used by over 200,000 companies. Kristin talked to B-Lab's co-lead executive, Sarah Schwimmer, about the evolution of the company, the evolving challenges they are seeing today, and some new assessment tools. Here's that conversation.
Hi, Sarah. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to talk to you about this. There's obviously a lot happening with purpose-driven businesses in this moment. This year actually marks 20 years of B-Lab, and the world is a little different than when the nonprofit was founded in 2006. So I wanted to start with hearing about how you see B-Lab's role now, 20 years on from its founding, especially as these conversations about, business responsibility and climate and stakeholder capitalism at large sort of keep evolving.
Yes, well, absolutely. It is a very different world today in 2026 than it was in 2006. Very different country as well here in the United States. And I find this moment, frankly, to be quite energizing. When B-Lab started 20 years ago, the idea of stakeholder capitalism, the idea that a business could prioritize stakeholders and shareholders, and not only shareholders, honestly, literally was laughable. We were not getting meetings, and those that we were getting were not serious. It was perceived as sort of this cute idea, maybe a mom and pop shop on the corner could do, but wasn't really possible at scale. And so we now are 20 years in here, and there are now over 10,000 B Corps around the world in over 100 countries, representing over 160 different industries, and importantly, employing over 1 million people around the world. So there's a lot more work to be done here. But what I find energizing about this moment, even as the context has changed, where we are seeing, rollbacks, regulatory pressures, political pressures that look different in different parts of the world, the proof of concept is here, right? So this idea has been proven that stakeholder capitalism is possible, that a different way of running our businesses is possible. And so now we're in this moment where folks are looking at, okay, well, what next? How do I continue to evolve my own business practices? How do I continue to connect and find other businesses where I can be learning, doing business with, combining forces for, enhanced procurement policies? And that to me is the real exciting bit, that in moments of maybe contraction or pressure in the business community throughout history, you see it's human nature, that is where we see some of the most innovative ways of working kind of evolve. And we're seeing that in the B Corp community here in the US and around the world.
It's interesting to be reminded of that beginning and what your reception was, because now it's sort of an expectation for businesses to think about or talk about these topics, right?
Yeah, so we absolutely have shifted from 20 years ago where the idea was completely foreign to today. Now the expectations for CEOs being quite different, and that shows up in a number of different ways. It shows up in the boardroom in some cases. It shows up in consumers and how they're making their purchasing choices, and it shows up in some cases in how investors are choosing to invest their capital. So I do think that even as there's this sort of like broader narrative around, perhaps there's this perception that there's a corporate retreat from some of these practices, the data says otherwise. And the data says otherwise in terms of corporate behavior as well, that companies are continuing to move forward with the practices that they understand are right for their stakeholders, but also right for their business, that they're not in tension.
Speaking to leaders specifically, like how should they be navigating this sort of moment and thinking about all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's kind of two ways to understand this, and there's the sort of individual company choice, and then there's the moment that we're in as a collective, as a society, not just the business sector. And so I think on the first point on individual choice, my advice to companies is to continue to understand what your company needs. You know your company, hopefully, better than anyone. And that means you should know your bottom line. You should know your value proposition. You know your consumers, if you're direct to consumer. You know your procurement policies. You know where you can be improving or enhancing, your practices. And if you don't know, then you can go to B Corporation website, bcorporation.net, and access the B Impact Assessment tool, which is a free tool. Over, I think, 300,000 companies around the world now have used this tool. And that is a tool that can help you actually better understand the behaviors and the sort of health of your business. So encourage company leaders to do that if you aren't already sort of assessing and tracking your own practices. But I think the second piece here is really looking at how do you find your collective? How do you find your people? What is important to your company, to your employees, to your consumers, your investors, your boards? And what are the actions that you can take within that space, within that area of expertise or that sort of zone of control that you do have? Not all CEOs need to be all things to all people or to all employees. And frankly, they shouldn't. And I think we have seen in recent history many examples of perhaps CEOs weighing in on areas that they may have very little to offer and add to the dialogue or the sort of impact that they're seeking to drive. So my advice is really to continue to understand the values of your company, the behaviors of your company, and make choices within the sort of zone of control and expertise that you have.
You talked a little bit already about the scale. Obviously, over the last 20 years, BLove has grown a lot, the more than 10,000 certified B Corps and all the others who use these tools. How do you make sure that your certifications still sort of mean something as you reach more industries and reach these larger companies and just grow in that way?
Yeah, so we are just now beginning to certify companies on our latest version of our B Corp standards. And this was years in the making, these new standards. We went through a really rigorous stakeholder engagement process, solicited tens of thousands of pieces of feedback from company leaders around the world, from employees as well. And what we understand to be true is that we need to continue to model what improvement looks like. So the certification is not the end of a journey. It really should be sort of the next major and difficult, in some cases, milestone. It is not sort of, okay, you've reached the peak and we can relax now. This is about modeling what continuous improvement looks like. And it's also about proving that operating a company in a way that is innovative, that is looking at what's working and what isn't and doing something about it, again, is possible and in alignment with the bottom line. And so for us, what the new standard is about is modeling that. And the two most important things that I would name that are different in the new standard are first, that there are now 7 impact topics, and any B Corp moving forward will need to perform against each of those 7 impact topics. So previously, it could be plausible that a company could perform really well in one area and maybe underperform in another area and yet still be able to achieve their certification. Now, moving forward, that will not be the case. And that brings me to the second point that I think is most important, which is that one of these 7 impact topics is what we call government affairs and collective action. And that is a really innovative, I would say, first of its kind sort of approach to how we understand measuring and assessing business performance, because it is really rooted in recognizing that with this new standard, all companies that are certified have met a threshold in each of these topics. So on climate action, all of them are delivering. On human rights, all are delivering, and so on. And so what is possible when we, now have that sort of foundation of companies? What is possible when we behave as a collective, when we demand changes in structural policy level needs? What could this community do? What even more outsized impact can this community of business leaders demand and drive when operating together and when operating in a very diverse and inclusive movement that still includes this really rigorous framework for what good business behavior looks like? So to me, that's sort of the future of where we're headed, of leaning into the power of these leaders and leaning into that in a way that we're bringing to bear the power of the collective.
Those thresholds for those 7 areas is what really sticks out to me about being really notable about these new standards. Like you said, previously a company could sort of score really low on climate action and still be certified. And I think that prompted a lot of people to maybe wonder, how is it that they're a B Corp then?
Yeah.
So tell me just a little bit more about sort of what those 7 impact topics are and why you picked those, why it matters that a company meets standards across those ones.
Yeah, so in the new standards, we are really have always been focused on ensuring that the B Corp standards are really measuring the whole health of a business. So not just looking at environmental or social or governance. That's part of the challenge. We don't want that to be siloed. So the new B Corp standards have 7 impact topics. The first is purpose and stakeholder governance, climate action, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, or JEDI, fair work, human rights, environmental stewardship and circularity, and then government affairs and collective action. So any B Corp moving forward will need to score within each of those 7 impact areas. And the reason that we landed on those is for a few reasons. One, incredibly robust stakeholder consultation process over multiple years. These are the areas that companies also indicated they want to be measuring against. 2, we wanted to make sure that these new standards have some level of harmonization and interoperability with other frameworks that are really well-respected, well-researched, and monitored in each of those areas. So there's a lot of interoperability between the B Corp standards and other standards. And then 3, what is, I think, probably most unique about this community is that this is a global standard. So there's a lot of challenges in there because what fair work looks like in Kenya is going to be very different than what fair work looks like in Canada. And yet the premise of this movement is one that we have a inclusive and big tent sort of movement that is proving that this way of doing business is possible in different parts of the world and in different sectors.
Yeah, that big tent comment, I know you've written and talked a lot about that, how B Corp should be this big tent and reach all these different industries and size companies. We've touched a little bit on this, but again, just to reiterate the point is how do you make sure that a certification like B Corp is something that really pushes these companies and the whole industries forward rather than just becoming a sort of box that they tick?
That's core to kind of our theory of change here. So we have a really rigorous verification and sort of audit process that companies do need to go through that's managed on a third party. And the standards themselves are in line with, and in many cases, going further than other comparable standards in each of those impact topics. So the goal here is really about proving and sort of providing a sort of framework or infrastructure for companies to push themselves and to question what might be possible. And often cases, even to just start measuring kind of some of these impacts. A lot of business leaders we have seen, they have a feeling that they're doing really well in certain areas, but then actually when it comes to measuring their impacts, there's a lot of room for improvement. And then it becomes sort of a tool and a mechanism for them to do that. So the other thing I would just say, and yes, I've referenced this community as a big tent movement. I think that that's really important because we need to understand that, again, in sort of our theory of change, our hypothesis here, we need to have a credible community of B Corps, and we need to have a diverse community of B Corps. And diverse means a whole host of things. It means the types of people who are leading these companies. It means the sectors in which they're operating, the regions in which they're operating, the governments in which they're operating, the sizes of company. And so this is a community that seeks to prove that, yes, the mom and pop, store on the corner that 20 years ago, legislators said, well, they're the only ones who'd be able to do this. They have, in a lot of ways, been the innovators and been the sort of first adopters. We need them. And also, we need to be able to prove that multinational corporations like Danone, for example, which just certified its entire group subsidiary, that they also can do this and that there is space for them to be behaving in this way. So again, the standard is really written in such a way that it seeks to challenge and advance some of the ways that even some industry-leading companies are already behaving and measure that, and then instill an ethos of continuous improvement as we continue to evolve and enhance the standards themselves.
With these new standards being more rigorous and having these thresholds across all these different areas, does this mean some companies will lose their certification?
Yeah, it's a great question. So let me say two things. First, our hope is that as many of the 10,000 plus B Corps that are currently certified and in this community, as many of them as possible will be able to come with us. They will choose to meet this moment and continue to improve their practices. And the new standards are really ambitious. It's a tension that we have been navigating for a long time of how do we ensure that we are bringing as much of this community along as possible while also continuing to hold a really high standard. And so in this moment, a couple of things that we're looking at. First, companies have time to meet the new standard, and it looks different depending on where they are in their own journey and in some cases where they are in the world because there are some regulatory needs that we need to prioritize. But on the whole, companies have time to engage with the new standards and make choices on how if and how they'll be able to evolve. And then I think the second thing I would say is that, again, in the process of building these standards, we had this really consultative approach, over 3,000 stakeholders across the world in this consultation process. And that was really focused on helping us to contextualize the new standards according to size, according to geography, according to sector. So these are not sort of monolithic depending on, where you are in the world or what sector you are, although there are foundational requirements. Our hope is that as many companies as possible will choose to and be able to come along with us. And we do expect that will be the case. And we have taken a decision that we do need to continue to evolve and improve the standards, ensure that they're ambitious, and that can't be downplayed just so that we can ensure that companies can come along with us.
What does success look like for a company that gets certified?
Yeah, we've got so many great examples. I think it depends entirely on how that company leadership board wants to engage and use the certification. We're seeing in some parts of the world that the certification almost acts as like a proxy for, in some cases, some investors to understand, okay, this is a cheat sheet for what sort of a healthy business could look like. We're exploring what specific investment funds could look like for B Corps in different parts of the world. In some cases, it's really very much about the brand. They understand if they're consumer facing in particular, and if they have in particular younger or want to have younger consumers in their client base, then the proof that they are operating in a way that is aligned with the values of their consumers or desired consumers is another way that they use the certification. I think the most compelling thing that I'll share from my perspective is that what we saw during COVID, and this was sort of an unexpected and unintended, unplanned for consequence, we saw that companies that were B Corp certified outperformed and frankly stayed in business at a rate much higher than sort of normal companies. And we've done a lot of research into that. And we think that where that is coming from is that there are just some policies and practices that B Corps need to interrogate or create if they want to become a B Corp that helped them engage with their employees, engage with their suppliers, engage with really hard decisions around, maybe mergers or anything along those lines. And I think as we continue to see just real uncertainty in our operating environment right now, given, political shifts, tensions, this question of how do you build a resilient company and a resilient employee base feels even more relevant than even it might have been 5-6 years ago at the onset of COVID.
To look ahead a little bit, if we were to sort of have this conversation again in 5 years, what do you think would have had to happen for you to say that that has been a success, that this shift is happening, not just for the community of certified B corporations, but beyond it?
A lot. We have big aspirations. I think there may be a few ways to take this. One, I've shared a little bit about the sort of U.S. context. I do want to just name that, we're seeing that there is a really complex sort of global picture that's been true for a while and maybe even more so now. So in places like in China and Singapore, in Japan, these are countries that are now introducing mandatory sustainability reporting. They're lifting that sort of floor, that regulatory floor. We are seeing in the European Union the Empowering Consumers Directive that takes effect later this year. Similar sort of approach to sort of raising that regulatory floor. I name those as just examples of where there's momentum right now. And you ask sort of in a few years, what do we hope will be true? What I hope will be true is that these countries will continue to sort of move ahead in those ways. And the reason is that sort of, again, raises the floor and makes the case for, it gives a bit of a carrot and stick approach for companies to understand how they need to be adapting their practices. We have always understood the sort of, our theory of change here is rooted in recognizing that the way that capitalism is designed today is exactly that. These are design choices. It's not the weather. It's not natural law. There are choices and laws that structure the way we make decisions. So for me, what good looks like in the next few years is more both awareness, more flagship, leadership from companies, both sort of these name brands, but also overall growth in the B Corp movement, and additional policies that are a part of designing the way, we practice capitalism in a way that prioritizes stakeholders alongside shareholders.
I think just that idea that it can be designed differently is hard for some people, right? Or is a new thought in the first place.
I agree. And even, for me, it has been sort of a slow evolution as well. We're human. I think we need to offer ourselves some grace and recognition that oftentimes the way that our human experience is that we understand the world based on the experiences that we have. And I think we can have curiosity and bring what makes a lot of people good CEOs, that sort of interrogative, innovative, questioning sort of mindset. We should be bringing that to the broader systems that define how we live our lives and how we run our companies. So again, when I was speaking a bit earlier about agency, this is really what I mean. Of course, we have to operate in the real world, and there are real limitations to that. And also, if you are leading a company, you have an opportunity to be dreaming and manifesting a different way of how you might want to be running that company, and to not have to do it alone, especially right now, that can feel really hard. So yeah, for me, it's about recognizing the agency we have, recognizing the opportunity we have to design a different way of doing business.
If there were sort of just one action you could challenge business leaders listening to take sort of tomorrow to get on this route, what would that be?
Honestly, I would direct them to the B Impact Assessment tool. I think that folks might be surprised at some of the things that they're doing really well, and some of the areas where they may think they're really knocking it out of the park and may not be. And the first step towards understanding how we might improve is measuring kind of how we are doing. And so I would direct folks to go to the website. Again, it's free. Check that out and start to really assess and see how y'all are doing.
Well, thank you so much for joining, Sarah.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, we're back with Harry, and it's time to wrap up the show with Keeping Tabs. This is where each one of us shares a story, trend, or piece of pop culture we're following right now. So, Harry, since you're our guest, what are you keeping tabs on?
I'm keeping tabs on vibe coding. I've been doing that for a while. This, I'd say, is maybe the single coolest thing that AI has given us so far is the ability to sit down with something like Cloud Code and tell it about a piece of software that you'd like to exist and then have it exist a few minutes later. I built my own email and word processor and note taker, and I'm fooling around with something that will let me post to Mastodon threads and Blue Sky all at once. I'm having a lot of fun reading what other people are creating. A lot of the tech journalists whose work I admire are also building things. And this is something that's entirely new in the last year, and it's really been only in the last few months that you didn't have to spend as much time debugging the thing you had created as building it. And I think this is really a powerfully good thing when you can use software that's designed to do what you want rather than what Google or Microsoft or Apple thinks you should do.
Kristin, have you vibe coded anything?
I haven't really. I guess I don't really know where to start. Like, I don't know what I would build, but I'm curious about it. And I think one thing I wonder about with vibe coding, I know obviously there's a lot of fears about this taking over these computer science jobs, but it's like, would this spur even more interest in this field for people who might have never gotten into it before?
I think so. And along with the fact that yes, this is going to have an effect on computer science as a career, there's just going to be a lot of software that never would have existed in the past. Like, none of the things I vibe coded would have existed. So they're not knocking anybody else out of having a career. They're additive. And I think you'll see a ton of that. You'll see companies maybe get rid of software they're paying for, but more importantly, they'll be able to create software that's unique to the things they want to get done, which in the past was a big ask. You had to pay people who knew what they were doing to develop software for you, and sometimes it would take a year to come to fruition, and you can do it much more quickly for a much more reasonable price this year. And I think that is all good, no matter how the rest of AI pans out for the world.
Yeah. Our friends over at Inc. have been covering the SaaSpocalypse, which is a term of art that I kind of love right now. Although, not great for companies, but no. SaaSpocalypse is just a fun portmanteau. Right.
And, along with it being cool to build stuff, there's just a lot of value in paying somebody else to worry about your software and maintain it. And there are all kinds of tools we use here at Fast Company that it would be silly for us to try to build ourselves. And it would cost us more in the long run. I don't think we're going to replace WordPress as our publishing system.
I haven't vibe coded something myself, but in addition to a reality television show, one of my favorite things to put on in the background while I'm working is just Twitch streamers and just people playing video games. I feel like such a loser when I put it on, but I like watching people speed run like Zelda Link to the Past and shit like that. But there's a few streamers that have basically vibe coded their own tracking software for video games and to interface with their things. And it's some pretty cool stuff. Like this one creator, Lord Hoyle, has created a whole tracker for his speedruns and also has incorporated something with 11 Labs where his super fans can type in, and on stream it will use his voice to say what the fans are saying. And he's been kind of working out and vibe coding this on stream for the past 6 months or so, and updating and evolving versions of this vibe coded AI. And I'm that's pretty cool. And honestly, just from a creator standpoint, is probably it's just good content too, which is fascinating and something that wouldn't have existed obviously before this vibe coding revolution that Harry's talking about.
It's fun to see all the weird ideas that people can turn from fantasy into reality extremely quickly.
Yeah. Meanwhile, I'm at the same place with Kristin where I'm like, I don't know what I would actually vibe code for myself that would be as useful as I want it to be.
Yeah, like what's like the very first step? Like where do you start? Because I guess it's even knowing like, what the possibilities are, which it sounds like they're endless, which is a little overwhelming, I think, because then you're like, well, what does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, there are an array of vibe coding tools, some of which are aimed at people who at least sort of know what they're doing. Along with Claude Code, Anthropic also has Claude Cowork, which is sort of vibe coding for the rest of us. It shields you from the fact that it's writing software, and you can do things like build like a simple to-do list. You can connect it to your calendar. My recommendation would be, if you're interested, try to build something incredibly simple just to prove you can do it, like the world's simplest to-do list or something that tells you what your next appointment is. And once you have the instant gratification of seeing you can do that, it might lead to bigger ideas because, I certainly am building things right now that I would not have tackled a year ago. They just seemed too daunting. And so build something small and something a little bit bigger. And then maybe at that point, you're ready to build something super fancy.
That makes sense to me. Just like the proving you got to start somewhere and then the ideas probably flow from there.
Yeah, I mean, programmers have always talked about hello world apps, meaning an app that just displays hello world on the screen. For vibe coding, it can probably be a little bit more ambitious than that, but something simple and uncomplicated. And it doesn't even have to be great necessarily. You just have to show yourself you can do it.
Kristin, what are you keeping tabs on?
Mine is a turn in the opposite direction. I just learned this. I think it launched on Earth Day, but Zach Galifianakis has a gardening show on Netflix. It's called This Is a Gardening Show.
Is it new or is it?
Yeah, it's brand new. It like launched on Earth Day. Apparently he's like really into gardening. He like started growing peanuts when he first moved to LA or something. And I think the show takes place somewhere on Vancouver Island. So it's like, obviously he has room now for more gardening. But I do think gardening is going to be this sort of like comeback thing of like, the literal touch grass of like getting your hands into the dirt. I tried to grow something on my fire escape once and then my super yelled at me for having a pot out there. But I had no idea that he was doing this. So that's sort of interesting.
I'm surprised I haven't come across this just in my algorithm because I've been like looking into what it would be to get into gardening on a balcony.
Yes.
And do that because I am really, and I love cooking. And I'm just like obsessed with the idea of like growing some of my own ingredients, particularly like herbs and like grape tomatoes and some smaller things. And then just like looking into like seeds and different like potting soils and stuff like that. So I'm so surprised I haven't come across this.
I think a lot of people are going to get into gardening. I feel like it's this next space that I've seen like sort of a lot of discussion about. I mean, I guess there's also like the economic question, right? Of like, if you can grow your own food, I don't know how viable it is for most people in that sense, but I think there's still something about connecting to your food in that way.
And
Harry,
I'm sure I could vibe code a tracking app for gardening of some sort.
Oh, yeah. Combine them. Yeah.
Gardening is always something that is on my to-do list, but never quite rises to the top. But I do have a nice backyard, and I have a beautiful tree with a bunch of flowers on it that looks great when it rains and not so great when it doesn't. And I should plant stuff back there and give it some TLC.
Yeah, keep us updated on the garden.
It's always interesting to learn about the hobbies of famous people and to realize that they have all this time, which they do not devote to being famous people.
Sure. Like, it's just a super normal thing to be like, I love gardening. Like, I have a garden. And you're like, wow, Zach Galifianakis.
Huh?
Good for you.
Well, I'm going to pivot us back to AI. So I don't know if either of you have been following the trending sounds on TikTok recently, but there's an AI generated it's like an 80s pop style AI generated song about San Juan, Puerto Rico. And it is nonsensical in the way that a lot of like AI generated song lyrics are, but it's an absolute bop that I can't get out of my head. And it was created on this app called Suno, just a text to song AI generation tool. And I've been playing around with it myself and just been making terrible songs about shitty towns in my home state of Rhode Island. And I'm going to give this to our editors. I don't know if I can play it for you here, if I can share my sound.
Oh, yeah. Insert a clip.
It's a pop rock anthem called West Warwick Nights.
The mills and the old brick line, boots on the pavement, kid. Everybody knows this town of mine.
That gives you the taste of it. It's such a simple AI version. The lyrics are just like whatever the Wikipedia page is for that town put into lyrics on a version of it, but it's really fun. It's really fun music.
It's always satisfying to hear a song about a place that resonates with you, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like I
a lot of the music
to...
industry is just built on that. Songs about towns.
For sure. I grew up going to Wildwood, New Jersey as a vacation place, and that Wildwood has a theme song. So
I've always wanted to go to Wildwood, but I've never been there.
Oh, it's a great place.
I've spent a tremendous amount of time messing around with Sora, this AI video social network that OpenAI just shut down. So I need a new way to waste time with AI. And so I should try my hand at Suno.
It's fun. And it just also reminds me that like music is essentially just patterns and math. So of course, AI is pretty good at creating earwormy type songs.
Do they have to be songs about places, or that's just the trend?
No, that's just what I've been doing because I think it's fun. And that's it for Most Innovative Companies. Harry, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, folks.
Our show is produced by Blake Odom, Sam Gabauer, Hawa Atori, and Mariam Kiparuidze. Editing by Matt Toder, mix and sound design by Tad Wadhams and Nicholas Torres, and our executive producer is me. Remember again to subscribe, rate, and review, and we will see you next week.